Hi, welcome to the Career Composing Podcast number 6. I'm your host, Nathan Swanson. Everyone's career is like a musical composition with experiences, talents, and dreams acting as the notes that drive the music. We want to help you use your skills to compose a refreshing career path. Share your experience, hear from others, and together, let's discuss your outlook and how it can change for the better. Today's topic is careers in tutoring, and our guest is Lee Elberson. Lee is the CEO of Clayborne Education. In addition to being CEO, he is in the Marine Corps and is pursuing a PhD in plasma physics. His passion lies in not only educating others, but in actively engaging with his local community. You can see his work through Clayborne that provides educational consulting, as well as his volunteer work with Community Investment Collaborative, a Charlottesville-based nonprofit where he teaches entrepreneurs the tools and skills needed to start and maintain a successful business. Lee, thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be on, Nathan. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, my first question for you is, could you kind of provide a quick synopsis of your career journey up to this point?
Sure. I think I led a pretty winding path. Whenever I was younger in high school, I obviously had a ton of part-time jobs. I worked retail, worked as a waiter, worked at a screen printing shop, but never really had a concept of what a career would be. Right out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps, as you mentioned, and that was my first glimpse at like what doing something for the rest of what I thought was the rest of your life. I realize now careers aren't for the rest of your life. And so in the Marine Corps, I sort of realized that there's a pretty solid structure in place to create a career, a retirement program, benefits, all of that. But something that was really missing for me was it didn't align well with my passions. Obviously, I think there's a lot of great things that came out of my time in the Marine Corps, but it wasn't until I went to college for the first time where I really started to figure out where my passions were. And my journey through college started with me thinking I knew what I wanted. There's been many times where I thought I knew what was going to make me happy, and I thought I was going to be an electrical engineer. I said, oh, I love taking stuff apart. It'll be great. Turns out after taking one semester of electrical engineering courses, I realized, oh, that's not what I thought it was. I hate that. Luckily, I had taken a physics class and pretty quickly sort of looked at it from a meta level and realized that physics is really just solving puzzles. I've always loved board games. I've always loved video games. And so that was a really natural fit for me. I was just solving these tiny little puzzles, maybe about 2 particles. And then as I advanced through my physics career, I got my bachelor's degree, and then the puzzles start getting more sophisticated, right? Then you're dealing with lasers, you're dealing with things on the quantum scale. That the problems, they're still puzzles, they're just much more nuanced, and there's puzzles inside puzzles. And then after I got my master's degree in pursuit of a PhD, I got to work at a national laboratory. And that's when, I realized that I was very passionate about learning, but the career in academia forced me to do a lot of other things that I wasn't a natural fit for. So there's a lot of introversion that happens throughout a career in academia. There's not a lot of interaction with others. There's a lot of time spent in the lab, and I felt very isolated. So I think it was born out of that I realized, I really want to be interacting with people. And I had actually been tutoring since I started college. I understood math and physics because I did it a lot. So I was always tutoring friends, and I never really thought that there was a career in tutoring. I just thought, oh, you just sort of tutor as a side hustle. And so when I moved to Charlottesville, I had forgotten everything I learned when I was younger. And I thought, oh, I'm going to start a tech company. I'm going to get back into electronic devices because it was still a hobby of mine. And so I wanted to start something. And I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur and start something, but still that idea of starting a business in technology, it didn't align with my passion of learning and helping others. And so pretty quickly I realized that I just needed to marry the two of tutoring and starting a business, and sort of that naturally led me into starting a tutoring business. But it was only because I had seen the value of tutoring that I wanted to start a business and then just help as many people as I could in tutoring, even if I wasn't able to help them out. And that obviously is seen in my volunteer efforts. I'm always looking to just help people. And so, starting a business in tutoring was sort of the last career decision I ever had to make.
So on that decision, with tutoring and pursuing that, like what would you say then as a follow-on question are some skills to be successful in that field?
Funny enough, if you would have asked me this 20 years ago, I would have said, oh, you have to be really smart at something. You have to have a lot of content expertise. And while that certainly is important, I think the one of the strongest skills you need strong interpersonal skills, sort of in a one-to-one basis. The ability to connect with another person, to see their vulnerabilities, and then also to have empathy for that, and realize that everyone starts from a different point, and it's your job as a tutor to sort of build on that, and to realize that the way you understand things is probably different from the way they understand things. So this is probably where the content expertise comes in. You need to know many different ways to attack problems. And you also, you need to be okay if the time scale of someone else learning something is different than your expectations. So, a lot of it is just being humbled and sort of putting aside your personal pride that you think, oh, well, I'm so good at this, I should be able to explain it perfectly to them. And that everyone sort of takes their own time. So I think those are some of the skills that make you successful as a tutor.
Do you feel, just as a dovetail on that question wise, do you feel there is like a certain order? So you have people who maybe out there like, I actually really talk well with people one-on-one. They're not content experts at all. They don't really like a certain topic just yet. Or do you feel it's people who, arrive at it from a different way? I'm not saying there's a direct or correct answer to this, but it's more, have you seen other tutors that you've interviewed and talked with and hired and all this? Like, has there been one where it's the experts and then you kind of help them along that? Or is it more of the people who have the drive for it and then they then have the expertise to then ramp up on?
Well, I think you've already alluded to it. I don't think that there's an exact pathway. I think you can be a content expert, right? You could be a PhD in something, and you can develop interpersonal skills and you can develop empathy. Those are skills that you can develop. I personally think that if you start with strong interpersonal skills and empathy, then really all you need to do is you just need to be a couple steps ahead of where the student currently is. So you can actually learn content on the way. And when I was teaching SAT and GRE prep, that's all I did. I hadn't really done those things either in a long time, or I didn't know, but I was always just a couple of steps ahead of the student. But you're more of a coach in that way, and you're more of a mentor. And I think, to me, that is one of the more natural pathways in, but it's not the only pathway.
So regarding, let's say, types of tutors, would you say there is some variation between them of like this one, there's this kind of sector group of them versus something else? Again, it's not like an either or, but like, do you feel there's a kind of like a grouping or again, a type of tutor out there?
Definitely. The tutoring market is pretty highly fractured. There's a ton of independents out there, and I think when you're an independent tutor, there's certainly tons of content experts, right? Like, I am a math tutor and I'm really good at this, so just come to me with any math questions. And then there's experts in a specific step of most likely an admissions process. Most of the time, people seeking tutoring are doing so because they're looking at what is the next step in their academic trajectory. Are they trying to get into an elite private high school? Are they trying to get into college? Are they trying to get into grad school? So those major steps require specific candidacy building steps. Some of it is standardized testing, some of it is essay writing. And so someone who has been through that process, obviously can coach people. if you've done enough different types of, like, let's say admissions, then you can actually coach people in a process that you're not 100% familiar with, but you know all of the key elements. So there's a lot of, I would say, candidacy building experts. And then I think something that's definitely come up a lot more in the last several years is a more holistic approach, which is just a coaching model. And it's one in which you don't claim to be an expert in Spanish or calculus or, getting into an MBA program. You just claim to be an expert in building executive functioning skills and building great organizational habits. And so they brand it, I'm an executive functioning coach, I'm an organizational coach, I'm an academic coach. So that's something that's definitely coming up more and more. And I think, especially given what's happened with the pandemic, I think that is going to be a lot more useful model moving forward.
And then speaking of kind of how people entered into this career, what would you say are some of the more popular or the I guess the major ways of on-ramps, like the pathways leading into tutoring?
Yeah. So, I think that the natural entry point is we get a lot of teachers who, maybe romanticize what it would be like to be a teacher. And I think one of the letdowns when you're a teacher is just realizing that you just can't help every student, right? You're trying to move a heap forward, and you have to do your best to move that entire heap forward as far as you can. I guess another downside to teaching is grading is always a major pain point. So when you come over to tutoring, those two pain points are almost immediately solved. When you're working one-to-one, you'll never get more information transfer than that. There's not currently any technological program that can transfer faster than that. And I think it's that need. Additionally, when you're a tutor, there's a lot of improvisation, which I think is missing in a traditional academic structure. So we definitely get a lot of teachers, but really anyone who's found the value in teaching another person or tutoring another person or seeing that aha moment finds the benefit of tutoring. So in terms of people that come to us for a side hustle, there's certainly teachers, but we get architects, we get just philosophers, we get people who, want to be valued for their time and want to feel like they're making an impact in someone else's life. So it's really tough for me to categorize people that way. We've had engineers, we've had scientists, we've had biologists, we've had waiters. There's just so many different skill sets that can be useful that it's tough to categorize them outside of a teacher who's looking for more high impact.
Okay. So with someone entering into this field or has been in this field or is reconsidering it to do a different kind of component to it, maybe they want to do more of the coaching model with, holistically versus just, helping with a specific topic. What would you say are some of the challenges that you encountered or that they're encountered by tutors in general? And so like if you, again, like what you wish you knew when you started a tutoring career, like what are some of those, I want to call them lessons learned, but kind of thinking through that now, and then kind of like if you told your younger self, by the way, just consider these 4 or 2 things maybe.
Yes. 2 things I would say that I would have told my younger self is 1, just start tutoring others earlier. I think there's always this fear that like, oh, I'm not an expert in this yet. And like I said, I didn't understand the concept of you only have to be a few steps ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is valuing your time. I think it's not unique to any entrepreneur that they don't value their time enough. But, I did, free tutoring is certainly a good way to sort of put your toe in the water. But once you've established demand, start charging for it, and you've got a business there. And I could have started that in high school probably, and definitely in college. And so I think that gives you a good understanding of, a lot of entrepreneurial concepts. And I think regardless of where your career trajectory takes you, maybe you become a business owner, maybe you don't, understanding the steps to being a good entrepreneur is a useful life skill to have. So that's what I would say. Start earlier, and with that, start charging earlier.
Right, and it's certainly, there's an element of entrepreneurship in there too, where you're providing a specific product or service, and then it's just trying to like, hey, I believe I can charge for this, and then seeing how that is, because you're bringing this experience and whatever it is to the table, and that there should be, for that value should be, again, the exchange in revenue there. So let's say, again, someone started in this career or is considering it, but after they, to your point, have put their toe in the water, and they're like, this isn't my cup of tea. What tangential careers, similar careers or related careers could they think of pursuing or look at if tutoring's not for them?
Well, I think tutoring and teaching are sort of natural fits. But something I've learned, especially if you look at where tutoring is going in terms of like the holistic nature, if you're good at helping people solve problems, consulting is honestly a really great choice for you. I know you'll appreciate this, but you're essentially just helping somebody to scope out a problem. You're coming up with a list of solutions, and you're helping them get to one of those solutions. And so to me, at its essence, that's what consulting is. And so I would say that tutoring is just it's educational consulting. So it's just a very small subset of that. So I think as a general career, you could get into that. And maybe the desire to create more independent consultants in our world is just, maybe it's a sign that there should be a pivot, and we should get away from like less fully structured careers. And I think that to me is why we've seen more tutors come to us. And it's just that people are piecing together careers now, I think, more than they ever have. And tutoring is, it values your time well. You usually get paid pretty well. And so I think it doesn't have to be an either or. You don't have to be a tutor for a little while and then go off and take a full-time job and then you don't tutor anymore. Another thing that's been really surprising is that a career tutor, I never thought that was a thing. But in our business, 4 years ago, we had one person who we really considered as a full-time tutor. Now we have 6. And so we're cultivating a career track where we provide, there's health benefits, there's structure, but there's also a lot of flexibility in it, right? Every session is different, and there's many different parts to growing a tutoring company. And so when a tutoring company is growing, there's a lot of jobs that somebody can wear. And so I think, unlike other fields, a career in tutoring allows a lot of flexibility. So again, I would say that if you get out of the field, then you could go to consulting. But honestly, always, if I was a tutor, I am a tutor, I will probably always be a tutor, just because there's just nothing like continuing to solve those problems. It keeps your mind sharp, and then you continue to provide value for those students. So, yeah.
And to pull on that thread for just a moment longer, what kind of helped you make that leap yourself from tutoring to then running a tutoring company?
Well, my track was actually pretty easy. I decided, I would say that anyone who is an independent tutor is running a tutoring company. They're just running a company of one. And in some ways, that is part of the value proposition that we offer people coming as independents. Because I know when I was an independent, I was like, all right, I can charge $7,500, maybe $150 an hour. That's mine. Go to work for a company, it's like, I'm going to get paid a fraction of that. What am I paying you for? Well, you're paying them for the marketing. You're paying them so that you don't have to do anything but tutoring. You don't have to do billing. You don't have to do scheduling. You just show up when it pops up on your schedule. So I think, that's yeah, I think that's an interesting piece to thinking about the career in tutoring.
Right. And I think just to comment on that, I think, as you mentioned, when you're a solo practitioner and you're doing that and operating that way, again, you have to look at all the various things, the bookkeeping, the accounting, and the sales, and the following up with people. And some people may not have strengths in those areas, or the ones they don't really want to develop that. And to
Sorry, I
find
realized actually I never answered your question. I'll answer your question. So mine was pretty easy. So I had a tutoring company, and I wanted to start what I would think is an official tutoring company where I was hiring other people. So I approached somebody I knew who had a tutoring company and said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going to start my own tutoring company, and I feel like I owe it to you to tell you." And he had a better idea. In fact, he said that he was like, "Well, why don't we be business partners?" And I thought that is a better idea. So I think also that leads to something I say in entrepreneurship a lot, is that if you can find a partner, somebody that has you have alternating skill sets, and somebody who is aligned with your personal mission, a business partner is a great way to go into it. So that's how I got into it. So to answer your question.
No, I appreciate the clarification on that too. To again, going back to on-ramps, that is certainly one way to do that, as opposed to you then start recruiting people that would work for your firm, versus, as your point, you kind of combine forces, and then have been running with it since. No, but I appreciate you unpacking that further, because it gets especially in consulting, when it gets, I've seen all different types of ways to get into it, and it can be, I'm not saying there's one way or another that's better, but I think going back to your personal journey, it's great to hear that and kind of how that all worked. We're not digging much into the timeline of when that all occurred, but like, I think, as you mentioned, you're now up to, you said 6 full-time tutors, and they have a bevy of other part-time tutors too.
Yeah.
Which, because of the flexibility of their schedule and the ability to do various topics and specialties, I think can really help with that. Well, great. My last question for you is, where do you see the tutoring kind of industry kind of heading, and especially during this pandemic? Like, what would you, this is certainly going to speculation, but like, what are you seeing?
Well, that's okay, because I love speculating. I think it's important to look at what the tutoring, and as we mentioned, the consulting industry does, is it supports other industries. Tutoring is educational consulting, and so we are supporting the education industry. And as we've seen, that the education industry has sort of been stagnant for a while. It's been right. I think it's been ready for disruption. And I think this COVID pandemic has sort of brought to the surface a lot of issues that are present in higher education, what it takes to get to that track. And so the tutoring industry has responded to that. And so I think what we've seen is that if we start from the higher ed level, which is a lot of what we do, is we prepare people for higher education, we're starting to see where the value of four-year education lies. When people talk about the college experience, it's, you do obviously have professors that make an impact, but that is not the big part of the college experience in my mind is the peer learning. It's meeting people who've got similar goals. Maybe they'll become senators one day, maybe they'll become CEOs. But these are people that you're learning together with, and that's where you gather a lot of the learning experience. As they've shifted that to online, that peer learning, for the most part, essentially dropped dramatically, probably by 90%. There was very few students who found a way to continually and effectively engage. And so now the colleges have to think about, well, what is our true value proposition? Is it bringing everybody together on a campus and obviously putting professors and the structure and accountability in place, certainly. But as that part has been brought to light and been fractured, I wonder if the future of education is moving away from, a 4-year education, right? Like, think about consulting again. It's a good example. You don't go to school for a consulting degree, right? I'm going to major in consulting. You don't do that, right? You collect a different amount of experiences and you get expertise maybe in one specific area.
Mm-hmm.
But if now when you're, if you're an interviewer and you're looking at a candidate, we just stream through a series of candidates with degrees. It's like, okay, we've got 20 applicants that have 4-year degrees. They all have very similar extracurriculars. What if that market fractured and people pieced together their education as they were finding out the career they want? So maybe they go to UVA for a year, and then maybe they take some Coursera courses, and then maybe they do a project-based learning project in South America. And, they're piecing together a resume that says, this is why I'm uniquely qualified for this job, instead of us churning people through this 4-year funnel. Now, granted, above everyone else, I understand the benefit of higher ed, but I wonder if, in terms of opening up career trajectory choices, if it was less focused on you having to commit for this 4 years and you being able to have a lot more selection in the process, it would not only open up career barriers, but it would also help smooth out socioeconomic barriers, right? Like, that's a huge barrier. If you can't get a scholarship to a 4-year college, you've already at a disadvantage. Even if you can get a scholarship, to build your candidacy to get that scholarship into a 4-year college, if you come from an under-resourced background, it's just going to make it very difficult. So my hope is that that's what will happen at higher ed, because if that's what happens at the higher ed level, high schools will follow suit, and middle schools and elementary schools will all follow suit. But the reason why we do standardized testing is because ultimately that's what ends up happening at the higher ed. And so this idea of getting away from standardized testing is, I have mixed feelings about it. I think I try to be an idealist. I think in an ideal world, if you had an unbiased test which had no gender or racial biases or socioeconomic biases, that's a great point. You want to be able to look at a student who grew up in Louisiana versus who grew up in Silicon Valley and be able to find out what level of rigor are they ready for. And a standardized test helps them do that. It helps you benchmark students. Unfortunately, the test does have these biases. So you can do away with it, but then you're dependent on less, you have less variables to be able to analyze students. And so when you look at grades, grade inflation is a major problem, and it's really difficult to look at students even within the same community, right? Like, within the same community, if somebody comes from a private school, somebody comes from a public school, it's really tough to understand what those grades mean. And then when you look even closer, but now you have to look at their socioeconomic background. So I think the more you take data points away, it just means that colleges and schools need to increase their budget for admissions officers, because what you need to do then is you need to allow every student to sort of make the case for why they can take the academic rigor and why they should be a good candidate for that school. And so, again, I hope this from the higher ed level forces schools to start look at other ways to help students learn. Project-based learning, I'm a huge advocate of that. I think when you look at traditional academic structure, it's a structure that was built 250 years ago, and having every student sit for English and math and science, it just, maybe that's not the structure we need to go for. Maybe you do that for elementary school, and then you start to let students choose their career path earlier. So anyway, I know I've just been blabbing for a while, but that's just some of the thoughts on where I hope we're headed. Where I think we're headed is the college industry. It's a $1 trillion industry. $1 trillion industries they're usually a little bit fearful of change. And so I don't think you're going to see rapid evolution in those markets. I think you don't want any of that to be fractured. You want to maintain your client base and your students. So it's going to take a while to change that industry, I think.
And so then looking at things based on the 30,000 foot view you've been giving us, and then circling back to with the, again, we're kind of, again, working on speculation here with how the educational industry in general will handle this, then kind of stepping back to then the tutoring and that career path, handling all the various things you shared as far as the variables and then the drive and what really is the value of higher level education, because that's what usually tutoring is helping with. They're helping people with certain topics in schooling, or in standardized tests, or just in general, like kind of an academic coach. You know, based on that, like how, like as they step into the future, any thoughts or advice or resources that you'd recommend, like, you know, this is where I've seen this can be really useful, or in a way like a lens or optics of viewing things?
Yes, I think, first of all, I think that the tutoring industry, at least right now, I think the value proposition has never been higher for having personalized instruction. I think the difficulty is when there's an economic downturn, individualized instruction and tutoring is definitely seen as a discretionary expense. And so that's a really tough thing to deal with, certainly as a business owner. As a tutor, because having personalized education is going to be so important, thinking about what is it you consider yourself an expert in? What do you feel confident in? And then how would you package that to help someone else learn? And also, always being on top of trends. Parents are very results oriented, so they want to know, what does it take to get my student kid to the next step? Parents always want better for their kids than they had, right? So it's obviously very difficult when you have parents that are doctors and MBAs. If they want better, they're going to be pushing their kids harder. So you need to be more aware of, what does the track look like to be pushing that student to success. So there's some really great books out there. Pedigree is a really great book, which talks about what does it take for students to go through these elite professional institutions like management, consulting, investment banking, top tier law firms. And that is obviously a very small subset of what you're preparing students for. But if you know what they look for, then all of the other careers, I think a lot of them take subsets from that when it comes into recruiting practices. And again, if the the goal is to help someone end up in a career that is sustainable and that they're happy with, then I think almost everyone has some sort of expertise that they can lend to a student. And so just making sure that your expertise is valuable to the student and making sure that you're aware of what those progressions look like. So I guess my advice would be, keep in touch with, this certainly forum. There's tons of forums out there that talk about college candidacy building. There's tons of forums out there that are industry specific. And so within your industry, like, be on those LinkedIn pages, just always be aware of changing trends, because I think higher ed changes could lead to recruiting changes, could lead to eventually career trajectory changes.
Oh, that's a great point. Well, with that, I think this is a good point to kind of wrap up. And this has been awesome, Lee, to hear not only your journey, but also you unpack really this career path, the tutoring career / industry. And so I'd like to, again, thank you for joining us today. What's the best way for people to reach out to you about either this topic or just things in general?
Best way to reach out to me is my LinkedIn page. Since the pandemic, I'm on my LinkedIn page probably 3 or 4 times a day. And so send me a connection request, send me a message. I'm always open to it. I am happy to hop on a 15-minute Zoom call if you have questions either about tutoring industry, volunteering, or entrepreneurship, or physics. Not many people want to talk about physics, but yeah, my LinkedIn page, which I'm sure you'll link in this article, is a great way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, Lee, I appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us on the Career Composing podcast. And again, thanks again.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And with that, this is again another, I feel, a fresh look into the career paths that you may have not considered as a viewer or listener to this. And I hope this helps you see the possibilities of, again, different types of careers. If you have any questions, like to chat further about the career challenges you're facing, or just things in general about careers, please email us at podcast@careercomposing.com. And then if those questions you share in those emails, we may even ask those and bring them up in future episodes. Thanks for listening to the show. It's been great, again, having this opportunity to share this career, and have a great rest of your day and keep composing.